Hello, my friends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really keeps the stories coming. I never thought I'd come back to these mountains. The kind of place you drive through in the daylight, think you know, and then leave thinking nothing could ever touch you here. But I was wrong. Deep Appalachia has a way of twisting your sense of reality, of taking familiar landscapes and turning them into a nightmare. I should have listened to the locals when they said, "Some places in these hills don't want visitors." It started with the road. The GPS led me to a narrow, twisting path through dense forest, the kind where the sunlight barely hits the ground. I was chasing a story, as I always do, some small-town mystery nobody talks about outside a few barroom whispers. My car tires crunched over old gravel, and I felt the tension in the air change, subtle at first, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I passed abandoned cabins with windows like dark, hollow eyes and signs of decay that suggested no one had lived there for decades. And yet, I could feel something watching. I found the town by accident, or maybe it was meant to be found. It wasn't on any map, at least none that I could pull up on my phone. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No cars, no dogs barking, no distant sounds of people living their lives. Only the wind moving through skeletal trees and the soft creak of rotting signs swinging on rusty hinges. A few weathered houses lined a dirt road, their paint peeling and smoke curling lazily from one chimney. But even that house seemed wrong, like it existed only to lure someone closer. I parked and stepped out, the air thick and sweet with the smell of decay. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I had this stubborn curiosity. I wanted to meet someone, anyone, just to make sure the town was real. I followed a thin trail up the hill and finally saw a figure on the porch of the lone, inhabited-looking house. An old man, hunched over, wearing a tattered flannel shirt, rocking slowly in a chair. His eyes were pale, almost white, and they followed me in a way that made my stomach knot. "Evening," he said, his voice low and scratchy. "You lost?" "Yeah," I admitted, trying to keep my tone light. I'm just passing through. Heard some stories about this area and wanted to check it out." He didn't answer at first, just stared, and I felt the weight of centuries of secrets pressing down on me. Then he muttered, almost to himself, "Not all stories need telling." Something in the way he said it, like a warning and a threat at the same time, made me shiver. But before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. The forest seemed to ripple, like shadows were moving against the natural flow of the light. And that's when I saw them. Figures, thin and elongated, slipping between the trees. At first, I thought it was some trick of the light, branches casting weird shapes. But they moved too fluidly, too deliberately, and their eyes, black, endless voids, locked on me. Panic surged. I tried to call out, but my voice felt swallowed by the wind. The old man on the porch chuckled softly at first, then louder, a sound that scraped across my nerves. "Can't run from what's meant to find you," he said. I spun and ran back to my car, heart hammering, but the road had changed. Where there had been clear gravel moments before, now there was thick mud and gnarled roots rising like fingers from the ground. My car refused to start, the engine coughing and dying as if the forest itself had its hand on the ignition. I was trapped. The figures moved closer, silent except for the occasional snap of a twig, the air around me growing colder, heavier. I backed into the shadow of a nearby cabin, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They weren't human, not entirely. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles, their faces stretched into grimaces that seemed painted on, their movements jerky but precise. One of them tilted its head toward me, and I could swear it smiled. I don't remember how long I stayed crouched there, frozen by fear. Minutes, hours, time became meaningless. Every instinct screamed that I should leave, but there was no leaving. The old man's voice carried from somewhere behind me, echoing across the hills, though I hadn't heard him move. They only take what belongs here. You're not theirs. Yet. Something slammed against the cabin wall. I jumped, barely catching the edge of a rotting window frame. Outside, shadows twisted and the figures pressed closer, their shapes warping in ways that defied logic. My mind screamed that this was impossible, but my eyes proved otherwise. And then, just as suddenly, they disappeared, melting into the forest like smoke. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. When I finally dared to peek out, the forest was empty. The air had grown still, eerily calm. My car somehow was parked where it should have been, and the engine started without hesitation. I drove without looking back. The old man's pale eyes and the black voids of the forest burned into my mind. When I reached the nearest town with cell service, I called the local sheriff. I asked about the place I'd seen, the abandoned town that seemed to vanish from maps. The man on the phone laughed, a warm, ordinary sound that made my stomach drop even further. "Deep Appalachia?" he said. "Ain't no town there. Not on any map, not on any record. Just hills. Folks talk about it sometimes. Crazy stories, mostly old legends about wanderers who get lost and the woods taking them. That's all." I wanted to laugh, shake it off as some overactive imagination fueled by isolation. But I couldn't. Not after what I saw. And I know, somewhere deep in those hills, the old man and his figures still wait, watching, knowing. And if you ever find yourself following the quiet roads, remember this: I didn't belong there, and they let me go. But some of them never let anyone leave. I haven't been back, and I never will. Every night since, I dream of twisted trees, pale eyes, and the echo of that old man's voice, warning me that the forest remembers, that it waits for those who wander too far. And deep down, I know it's only a matter of time before someone else hears those whispers and drives into the same impossible place. And maybe, when they do, they won't come back. I never meant to end up in deep Appalachia. I didn't even know that's where I was when everything went wrong. I'd been driving for hours, trying to outrun the stress of work, the noise of the city, and the weight of a life that felt like it wasn't mine anymore. I'd taken a random exit off the highway somewhere in Virginia, thinking a long mountain drive would clear my mind. The kind of impulsive decision you make when you're tired and want the world to feel bigger than your problems. But the deeper I drove into the mountains, the more I realized that these weren't the postcard Appalachians tourists hiked every summer. These were older, darker, wilder. This was the part of the mountains people didn't talk about, the part that seemed to breathe on its own. After a few hours, my phone lost signal altogether. The road thinned to a cracked ribbon of asphalt. Every mile felt like stepping back in time. Trees leaned over the road as if trying to close it off. There were no houses, no cars, just endless forests swallowing the horizon. Then I saw the sign. It was so faded I almost missed it. One of those wooden town markers you'd expect outside an old mining settlement. The paint was chipped and the letters were barely visible, but I could make out the name: Harrow's Creek. Population: unreadable. Founded: also unreadable. Something about the sign bothered me immediately. The wood wasn't weather-beaten the way you'd expect. It looked torn, almost clawed at, the grooves unnaturally deep. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. I told myself I'd find a place to grab a meal, stretch my legs, and maybe get directions back to the main road. Small towns always had one diner still hanging on, but Harrow's Creek had nothing alive anyway. The first house I saw was collapsing under its own weight, the roof caved in, porch swallowed by weeds. The second wasn't much better. A rusted truck sat in the yard with no tires, half sunk into the earth like it had been forgotten for decades. But the strangest thing wasn't the state of the buildings, it was the feeling. The air felt thick, like humidity before a storm, except the sky was clear. There was no wind, no birds, no insects, just a silence so total it pressed into your ears. I kept driving until the road ended in front of an old general store. The windows were coated in grime, the sign hanging crookedly. Against all reason, the lights inside were on. I parked and stepped out, trying to convince myself this wasn't completely insane. My footsteps sounded too loud on the dusty wooden porch as I pushed open the door. Inside, the air was stale, like the building had been sealed shut for years. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with items that looked decades old. Canned goods with labels from the 80s, dusty bags of dog food, stacks of newspapers faded to brown. Then I noticed the man behind the counter. He stood perfectly still, staring at me with eyes too pale to be natural. His clothes were old-fashioned, suspenders, a button-up shirt, and boots that looked handmade. His skin was so thin it clung to his cheekbones. "Afternoon," he said, though I couldn't tell if it actually was afternoon anymore. The inside of that store felt like it existed outside time. "Hi," I said cautiously. "I'm lost. I was hoping for directions." The man stared at me for a few seconds too long. "Lost," he repeated quietly. "Folks who come through here tend to stay that way." I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, the roads are pretty confusing out here. Is there a way back to the main highway?" The pale man blinked slowly. "Highway's gone." "Gone?" He nodded once. "Ain't been a highway near Harrow's Creek in a long time. Roads shift out here. Forest takes what it wants. Always has." My stomach tightened. I'm sure it's still there. I just got turned around. "You're far from where you think you are," he said. "Best to keep your head down and stay indoors once the dark settles. They come out then." "Who?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the back wall, where an old bulletin board hung crooked. "Town rules are posted. Been that way since the beginning." I walked over and squinted at the yellowed paper tacked to the board. The ink looked handwritten. "Rules of Harrow's Creek. Do not remain outdoors after sundown. Do not look into the tree line. Do not answer when you hear your name. Do not acknowledge the ones who do not belong. If you hear tapping on the windows, stay silent." "What is this?" I asked. The man exhaled slowly. "Warnings." I tried to brush it off as local superstition, the kind small towns cling to out of habit. But the way he said it, there was no humor, no exaggeration, just cold certainty. "I'll just get back to my car," I said finally. He didn't stop me, but his last words followed me out the door. "Don't stay after dark." I reached my car just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The sky seemed to darken faster than normal, like the mountains swallowed the light as soon as it touched them. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then cut out. I tried again. Nothing. A cold sweat broke across my back. I popped the hood, but I knew nothing about engines. Everything looked normal. No smoke, no broken belts. It just wouldn't start. The silence grew heavier. Leaves rustled even though there was no breeze. Somewhere in the forest, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps. Heavy, unhurried, too rhythmic to be an animal's. I backed toward the general store, the sun vanishing entirely behind the ridge. The darkness came down like a curtain. One moment it was twilight. The next, it was night. And that's when I heard it. A voice from the tree line. A voice that sounded exactly like mine. "Hey, I need your help." My blood froze. I'd never heard anything mimic my voice so perfectly. Pitch, tone, desperation. But the most horrifying part wasn't that it sounded like me. It was that it sounded like me from a moment ago, like an echo of my own fear being thrown back at me. "Come here," it called again. "Please, I'm hurt." The rules flashed in my mind. Do not answer when you hear your name. Do not acknowledge the ones who do not belong. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Then something huge shifted behind the tree line. Branches snapped under its weight. The ground trembled. The voice, my voice, kept calling out, growing more distorted with each plea. "Please, help me." I stumbled back into the general store, slamming the door behind me. The pale man was gone. The lights flickered. I locked the door. Outside, slow footsteps approached the porch. The boards creaked under immense weight. Something dragged across the wood like long fingers or claws. Then came a soft, deliberate tap on the window. Tap, tap, tap. My heart pounded so violently I felt dizzy. Tap, tap, tap. "Open up!" the voice whispered from the other side of the glass, still mine, but now stretched thin, like something was trying too hard to sound human. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. The tapping stopped. For several minutes, everything was still. Then I heard footsteps moving around the building, slow and circling. Something scraped along the walls, trailing me as I moved deeper into the store. I crouched behind the counter, trembling. My mind raced for explanations. Escaped convict, wild animal. But deep down, I knew the truth was far older, far stranger. Harrow's Creek wasn't abandoned, it had been claimed. I stayed hidden through the night, listening to the sounds of something impossibly large wandering just outside. Occasionally it would try another voice, a child crying, a woman sobbing, a panicked man calling for help. The mimicry was flawless, but emotionless, like repeating sounds without understanding them. At dawn, it stopped. The moment sunlight touched the windows, the forest exhaled and the weight lifted. I stepped outside cautiously. The town looked the same as before, quiet, abandoned, forgotten. Except now I understood why. I tried my car again. It started immediately. I didn't question it. I drove until Harrow's Creek disappeared behind a curve. Then I kept driving until cell signal returned. That night, in a motel 2 towns over, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for Harrow's Creek. Nothing, no records, no mentions, no old maps. It was like the town had never existed. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know something in those mountains mimics voices to lure people into the dark. Something ancient, something patient, something that waits for the lost and the curious. And every now and then, when I'm alone and the house is silent, I hear a soft tapping at the window. Tap, tap, tap. And a voice, my voice, whispers from the darkness, "Let me in." I don't answer. I never will. Because I know if I do, what waits outside will finally have a reason to step inside. And I don't think anyone who lets it in ever gets to leave. I should have known something was wrong the moment the road disappeared from my GPS. 1 second, I was following a clear route through the mountains, and the next, the screen glitched into a blue haze before going blank. I tapped it a few times, but nothing brought it back. Typical Appalachia, I thought. Cell signal comes and goes. It didn't worry me at first. I'd driven through the region dozens of times for work, but this time felt different, though I couldn't explain why. I was on my way to interview a retired park ranger for a podcast episode about unsolved disappearances. Appalachia, especially the deeper regions, had more of them per capita than nearly anywhere in the country. Locals had stories, dark ones, stories of hikers vanishing feet from a trail or hunters found days later barefoot and babbling nonsense. I'd built a reputation for investigating strange tales with an open mind, but a logical perspective. There was always an explanation. Always. But that belief broke in the mountains of deep Appalachia on a road no longer visible on my GPS. The canopy thickened until the sunlight barely touched the pavement. The pavement itself narrowed, cracked, swallowed by weeds. I rolled the windows down, expecting to hear the normal sounds of forest, birds, insects, wind. Nothing, not even distant rustling. The silence made the woods feel staged, like a painting someone forgot to finish. A few miles later, I saw a sign nailed to a tree, hand-painted and crooked. Fog Hollow, 5 miles. Fog Hollow wasn't the place I was headed. In fact, I'd never heard of it. Still, it was the only sign of civilization I'd seen in half an hour, so I kept going. The ranger I planned to meet could wait. I figured Fog Hollow might be close enough to ask for directions. But the farther I drove, the more the air pressed against my chest. Heavy, cold, metallic. I tried to shake it off as mountain weather, but the feeling only grew sharper. About a mile out from the sign, something crossed the road ahead of me. At first I thought it was a deer until it stood upright. The figure was tall, too tall. It moved strangely, as if each limb operated on its own delay. Thin arms, a long torso, something like hair hanging matted over its face. I slammed the brakes. The figure turned toward me, but not with a natural motion, more like a puppet jerked by invisible strings. Then it stepped into the woods and vanished. Every instinct told me to turn the car around, but there was no room to turn on the narrow mountain road, and reversing for miles wasn't practical. Besides, I convinced myself, maybe it was just a sick animal. Hunger and disease do strange things to wildlife. I drove on. Fog settled around me, growing so thick I could only see a few yards ahead. The temperature dropped sharply. Goosebumps crawled over my arms. I rubbed them and told myself to stay focused. Fog was normal in the Appalachians. Locals even said it had a personality, came and went as it pleased. But this fog felt deliberate, as if it was following me. Finally, the forest opened into a small valley. At its center was a town, or what used to be a town. Half a dozen houses slumped against each other like rotting teeth. A church steeple tilted sideways. A creek cut through the center, black and slow-moving. Fog Hollow. My car sputtered, then died completely right at the town's edge. I turned the key. Nothing. The air smelled sour, like wet stone and iron. Great, I muttered. Perfect place for a breakdown. I stepped out. The moment my boots hit the ground, the silence became unbearable. The kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I walked toward the closest house. Its porch sagged inward, boards warped from decades of neglect. As I stepped toward the window, I noticed something odd inside the glass. Not movement, not a figure. A shape, tall and thin, standing just out of view. When I blinked, it was gone. My mind tried to explain it. Reflection, shadow, imagination. Anything but the truth. I moved deeper into the hollow. The fog swirled around my legs as if nudging me in a specific direction, to the church. Its front door was open, hanging crooked. Inside, the pews were overturned. The altar was smashed. Hymnals lay scattered, pages ripped, waterlogged. But it wasn't vandalism. It was more like something enormous had moved through. In the corner of the church lay a journal. Old, leather-bound, swollen from dampness. Curiosity overpowered fear. I opened it. Most pages were smeared beyond reading, but one entry was clear enough to make out. They come from the fog. Not spirits, not beasts. Something older. They mimic shapes to lure us. They want us to look. Once we see them clearly, they never let us go. We barricade ourselves every night. But the fog is growing. The town is dying. A cold shudder ran through me. I snapped the journal shut and backed out of the church. Outside, the fog was thicker. My car was barely visible. I started toward it, but froze. A voice drifted through the fog, a woman's voice. "Help me, please." My blood ran cold. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Not at first. Then it hit me. It was my mother's voice. She had been dead for 8 years. "Please, I need your help." I shook my head. No, that's not real." The voice came again, this time closer. "Come here." I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The fog in front of me shifted, forming a vague human outline. Then 2. Then 3. Shadows. Tall, thin, bending at impossible angles. I bolted to the nearest house. The door was unlocked, and I slammed it shut behind me. Inside was pitch black, except for a faint light coming through warped shutters. The air smelled of dust and something sweet. Too sweet. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the walls were covered in carvings, dozens of them, scratches forming shapes of tall, distorted figures with hollow eyes and stretched limbs. Over and over again, hundreds of them. Something thumped against the outside wall, slow, heavy. I pressed myself against the interior wall, trying to quiet my breathing. The thumping circled the house, once, twice, then paused outside the door. The doorknob turned, once, twice, slowly. I held my breath. The knob stopped turning. Silence returned. Then, through the wood of the door, a voice whispered, "Let me in." But it wasn't my mother's voice anymore. It was mine. I clamped my eyes shut. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Finally, after what felt like hours, the presence withdrew. When morning light crept through the shutters, I dared to step outside. The fog was gone. My car started on the first try. I tore out of Fog Hollow without looking back. When I reached cell signal, I searched everything I could about Fog Hollow. Nothing came up. No history, no records, no ghost town lists, nothing. I contacted the retired ranger I'd planned to interview. When I mentioned the town name, he went silent. Finally, he asked, "You went there? Fog Hollow?" "You know it?" I asked, relieved to hear some confirmation. "Not anymore," he said. "That place shouldn't exist. Flood wiped it out in the 1940s. 12 people vanished before the government sealed the valley. Locals say the fog itself became wrong." I swallowed hard. "Something's still there." His voice lowered. "Did you look at anything in the fog?" "No, I don't think so." "Good. Then don't go back. And if the fog ever finds you again, don't listen to it." That should have been the end of it. But some nights, more often lately, I wake up to a thin veil of fog creeping under my bedroom door. And from somewhere inside it, a voice, my voice, whispers softly, "Come outside." I don't answer. I don't look. But I know the fog followed me out of the mountains, and it's getting closer. I should never have taken that last house call. Being a land surveyor in rural Appalachia had its strange moments. Old homesteads, abandoned mines, cryptic property lines, but nothing that ever made me fear for my life. Not until the day I drove into Revel Gap, a place I had never heard of and still can't find on any map. It started as a simple assignment, confirmed the boundaries of an inherited property deep in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. The client had passed away, leaving the parcel to a nephew who wanted nothing to do with the land. "Just document it," he told me over the phone. "I'll sell it as is." His voice carried the strained hesitance of someone talking about a place he'd rather forget. The directions he gave me were odd. "Take the gravel road until you see the old iron bridge. Don't cross it. Take the trail on the left." When I followed his route, the bridge was exactly where he said it would be. Rusted through, overgrown, one side collapsed. But what bothered me was that the trail he mentioned wasn't a trail at all. It was a narrow opening between two walls of brush, the entrance half hidden, like the forest had tried to erase it. I considered turning back, but my truck could handle rough terrain, and I needed the money. So I pushed in. Within minutes, my phone lost signal. The sky dimmed under a dense canopy of hemlock and oak. The trail twisted in ways that made no geographical sense, switching back sharply, then sloping downhill even though the topography map I'd reviewed showed a flat ridge. The deeper I drove, the more distant the world felt, like the forest was folding in behind me. After 20 minutes, the path opened into a clearing, and I instantly knew something was wrong. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Even the air was unnaturally still. In the center of the clearing stood a farmhouse, not abandoned, but frozen, every window shutter closed, chimney clean, porch swept, as if whoever lived there had stepped inside and never come back out. And beside the house at the tree line hung a rope, not tied to anything visible, just hanging, swaying slightly, even in the windless air. A chill crept down my spine. The property markers were supposed to be around the perimeter, small brass caps hammered into the ground decades ago. I stepped out of the truck and grabbed my equipment. The moment my boots touched the clearing, a faint sound drifted from the woods, a low hum, almost like someone whispering underwater. I froze. It stopped. I shook it off, probably the wind, even if I hadn't felt any, and walked toward the first supposed boundary. As I searched through the tall grass, the hum returned, slightly louder, still muffled, like voices arguing beneath a river. I whipped around, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Then something caught my eye. Footprints. A single line of them, moving from the porch of the farmhouse toward the woods. The prints were spaced too far apart for a normal stride. Each one dug 6 inches into the soil, as if made by something unbearably heavy. They stopped at the rope. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the job, but every few minutes I caught something in my peripheral vision, movement between the trees, a dark shape gliding too smoothly to be a person. Each time I turned to look directly at it, it vanished. I forced myself to breathe. Just finish the check and get out. I found the first brass cap half buried under leaves. Kneeling to document it, I noticed the soil beneath was unnaturally cold. My breath fogged. It wasn't even 50 degrees out. Something cracked behind me, a sharp, deliberate snap. I stood slowly. A figure stood at the far side of the clearing, 20 yards away, still as a gravestone. It wasn't a person, couldn't be. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. Its torso curved subtly sideways, as if its spine bent in more than one direction. The shape swayed, not in a breeze, but like it struggled to balance a body that wasn't meant to stand upright. My mouth went dry. The thing tilted its head, a motion so smooth it seemed to glide through the air. I couldn't see its face, shadows swallowed its features, but I felt it examine me the way an owl examines prey. My instincts screamed to run, but when I blinked, it was gone. Just gone. I backed toward the truck without turning around. I knew better than to show my back to something like that. Halfway there, the humming returned. Louder, closer, harmonizing with itself like multiple whispers speaking the same garbled sentence. Then a new sound joined it, soft and rhythmic. Footsteps. Behind me. Slow. Deliberate. I walked faster. The footsteps matched my pace. When I reached the truck, I yanked the door open, then froze. Something had carved into the inside of the driver's side window, fresh scratches deep into the glass. Don't look back. My heart thundered. The footsteps stopped directly behind me. I didn't look. I threw myself into the seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and prayed. The engine sputtered, once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed the accelerator so hard the truck fishtailed. As I tore down the trail, the woods blurred around me. Branches scraped the sides as the path narrowed unnaturally, like the forest was collapsing in pursuit. In the rearview mirror, something tall and black stretched across the trail. Not running, not walking. Sliding toward the truck, its limbs bending and rebending in impossible ways. I kept my eyes on the road. Every nerve screamed not to look directly at it. The trail twisted violently, sharper than before. Impossible bends. My tires skidded through mud that hadn't been there earlier. The world warped between shadows and light, as if the forest couldn't decide what was real. Just when I thought the path would swallow me whole, sunlight appeared ahead. I burst out of the tree line and onto the gravel road by the rusted bridge. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't breathe until miles later when my phone suddenly regained signal with a ding loud enough to make me flinch. I pulled over and sat there shaking. My hands left sweat prints on the wheel. My pulse hammered so hard my vision pulsed with each beat. Curiosity, stupid, dangerous curiosity, forced me to check the pictures I'd taken of the property markers. The first image appeared normal. The second showed a long shadow stretching toward me, far longer than anything that could have cast it. The third photo made my blood run cold. It was taken at the clearing's edge. In the background, barely visible through the trees, was a face. Pale, featureless, except for a gaping vertical line where a mouth should be. And it was smiling. I backed out of the photos before I could see more. A week later, the nephew called, asking if I had completed the survey. I told him I couldn't access the land, that it was unsafe, that he should speak to the county. He went silent. Then he said something that still haunts me. "Yeah, I figured you wouldn't get far. Nobody else ever has." "You didn't warn me," I snapped. "I tried," he whispered, "but no one believes it unless they go." He told me the land had been in the family for generations, that people vanished there, that his uncle, the man who died, had spent his last years raving about figures in the woods and whispers under the soil. I asked him why the land was ever lived on. His voice hardened. Because some things in Appalachia claim land long before people do, and sometimes they just let us borrow it for a while. I thought that would be the end of it, but in the night since, as I lie awake, I hear humming outside my window. Low, wet, like whispers under a river. Last night when I went downstairs for water, I saw a tall black shape silhouetted on my front lawn, swaying gently, trying to balance a body not meant for standing. I didn't turn on the porch light. I didn't look at its face. I closed the blinds and backed away slowly, heart pounding, repeating the words scratched into my truck window. Don't look back. I don't know if what followed me home is the same thing I saw in Revel Gap, or if the forest sent something else. But I know this. Something in deep Appalachia watches those who trespass, and once it sees you, it does not forget. I've always been drawn to the mountains, especially the parts nobody talks about. Appalachia is full of trails, small towns, and abandoned hollers that aren't on any map. I've driven past them countless times for work, for camping, for the quiet I can't find anywhere else. But nothing prepared me for the day I ended up in what I later learned locals whispered about as Blackwood Hollow, a place even seasoned hikers avoided. I was on my way to photograph old logging sites for a magazine feature. GPS had me take a narrow forest road that, according to my screen, shouldn't have existed. Gravel gave way to mud, and soon the road had vanished entirely, swallowed by the trees. I wasn't worried yet. I've driven rough roads before, but even from the start, something about that route felt unnatural. Hours passed, though I have no idea how long. The sun hung low between the mountain ridges, slanting long shadows through the trees. Mist began to rise, curling at my tires, a kind of fog that feels alive, like it's watching. I reached a clearing and saw a house. Not abandoned exactly, it looked maintained, almost deliberately so. A porch with 2 rocking chairs, flower pots on the steps, smoke from the chimney. But no other signs of life, no animals, no trail marks, no road leading to it that I could see. I stepped out, camera bag slung over my shoulder. The air was heavy, almost viscous, carrying the sharp scent of wet pine and something metallic beneath it. As I approached the porch, I saw movement, an old man rocking slowly, staring straight at me. He was tall, skinny, with hollow cheeks and a face I swear looked carved from wood. "You're far from anywhere, son," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried in the clearing like it was meant to. "Not many find this place anymore." I'm just passing through," I replied, though I didn't know why I said it. I was headed to, I gestured vaguely toward the mountains. He shook his head slowly. "Not headed anywhere you think you are. Roads twist here. You won't leave the way you came." I tried to laugh, nervously, but my throat felt dry. I asked him about the logging sites. He tilted his head. "Don't need to look for what's already been taken." I frowned, unsure what he meant. Before I could press further, the sun dipped behind the ridge and a shadow fell across the clearing. I felt it first in my chest, like gravity had shifted. Something in the forest moved, slow, deliberate. It wasn't a deer, not a bear, not anything normal. The old man didn't react, though I could see his fingers tighten on the armrests of the rocking chair. I froze. Then the thing stepped into view, a figure tall and thin, arms that hung too long, legs that bent at impossible angles, its head tilted sideways, unnaturally, watching me. Its skin, I don't know, pale, gray? Whatever it was, it absorbed light. It moved without rustling leaves, without snapping twigs. I stumbled backward. The figure mirrored me. Not exactly, more like it anticipated my motion. My pulse raced. I fumbled for my camera. I tried to capture it. Every frame showed it further back than it should have been, like it stretched and shrank with the light, warping its shape. "Don't look too long," the old man said. "They like that." What is it?" I asked, voice shaking. "They take what doesn't belong," he whispered, "and they learn from you if you stare too long." The sun set completely. The shadows became solid, thick. My breath hung in front of me. The forest seemed to fold around the clearing, walls closing in. The figure was gone, though I could feel its eyes on me. I ran toward my truck parked at the edge of the clearing. The tires sank slightly in mud, the fog curling around them, and I noticed footprints I hadn't left. Huge, elongated prints leading straight to the truck. I don't know how my heart didn't stop on the spot. I drove, or tried to. The truck groaned, the engine stuttered, then died. Dead. I turned the key over and over, nothing. That's when I heard the first whisper. My name, my voice, almost. "Come here." I spun. Nothing. Trees swayed gently, but the whisper came again, closer, louder. I swear it sounded like me calling myself. I ran, leaving the truck behind. The forest swallowed the road. Branches seemed to reach for me. Shapes flitted between the trees. Too many to count. Human, not human. I couldn't tell. They moved in impossible ways, gliding or bending around trunks without noise. Then the old man's voice cut through my panic. "The forest doesn't want you to leave. Not yet." I turned to see him standing in the shadows of the porch, taller now somehow. He raised a finger. "Follow me." Against every instinct, I did. I ran toward him. The fog parted like a curtain, revealing a narrow path that had not been there before. Every step, I felt something brushing against my skin, like fingers, but nothing solid. Shapes followed me, watching, studying. We reached a cabin half hidden behind thick brush. He gestured inside. The door creaked as I stepped through. The air was stale but warmer. Candles burned on a wooden table, flickering against the walls lined with shelves of jars filled with unrecognizable things, roots, bones, leaves, but I didn't dare look too close. "Sit," he said. "Eat." On the table were biscuits and tea. I refused, terrified, but he insisted. "They won't touch you here. Not yet. Not if you follow the rules." "Rules," I whispered. He nodded. "You do not speak of what you see outside. You do not step into the mist after dark. You do not acknowledge their calls. You do not look too long. That is how they learn. That is how they claim." I felt trapped between relief and terror. I wanted to leave, but I had nowhere to go. The forest outside had swallowed my truck, my road, everything I'd relied on. I stayed in that cabin until first light. The fog thinned slightly, the shapes receding, the whispers fading. I stepped outside cautiously. The clearing looked empty, abandoned. My truck was gone, replaced by soft, moss-covered ground. Not a single tire track, not a single mark of human passage. The old man was nowhere. The cabin looked smaller, older, like it had existed forever in that spot, but also never existed at all. I walked down a slope, hoping to reach some recognizable landmark. Hours passed. I found a stream and followed it downstream, convinced it had to meet a road eventually. And it did. But it was the same iron bridge I'd crossed that morning, the one from the directions. Only now, the road on the far side looked cracked, broken, and overgrown. The forest swallowed it like it hadn't existed in years. When I reached the nearest town, I called for help. I told people about the road, the house, the forest. Nobody had heard of Blackwood Hollow. Nobody remembered a road called that. The bridge? That collapsed years ago, the clerk said. Nobody goes that way anymore. I never returned to the mountains. I quit my job. I can't hike, camp, or drive in rural Appalachia without feeling eyes on me. Shadows in the trees move differently now. Shapes linger in fog. And sometimes, at night, I hear whispers, my voice calling my name from corners of my house, from the mist curling around the property. I've tried to explain it rationally. I've tried to dismiss it. But I know what I saw. I know it followed me home. And I know the forest will never stop watching. Somewhere in Blackwood Hollow, they wait. Waiting for the next person curious enough to wander too far. Waiting to claim. Waiting to teach the forest's rules again. And if you ever drive into the deep Appalachians, remember, the fog is never just fog. The shadows are never just shadows. And the whispers are never just the wind. Some things in these mountains do not forget. Some things do not forgive. Some things do not let you go. If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.